He didn't even look back when he walked out the door. That's the part I keep coming back to. Not the words he said, though those were bad enough, but the fact that he just grabbed his keys off the counter, straightened his collar in the hallway mirror, and left. Like I wasn't sitting there in the living room with a heating pad pressed against my abdomen and a discharge folder from St. Mercy in my lap. Like the past 4 days hadn't happened at all. I had just come home from the hospital that morning. Let me back up because I need you to understand what the 4 days before that looked like. I'm 29. I've been married to my husband for 3 years. His name is Brennan. We met when I was 25 at a conference in Chicago. He was charming and quick, and he laughed at everything I said, which at 25 feels like love. We got married in October in a vineyard upstate. My older brother Theo flew in from Seattle. My mom cried. It was the kind of wedding that makes you feel like you've done something right. For a while, I thought I had. Brennan works in finance. I'm an interior designer. I have my own small studio, mostly residential clients, some commercial. We're comfortable. Not wealthy, but comfortable. The apartment is mine. I bought it 2 years before we met, with money I'd saved and a loan my dad helped me secure before he passed. Brennan moved in when we got married. He's never paid the mortgage. We agreed early on that I'd handle the apartment and he'd handle our joint expenses, dinners, vacations, the car we share, that kind of thing. That arrangement worked fine until it didn't. 8 months ago, I started getting headaches. Real headaches, not the kind that go away with ibuprofen. Then fatigue that felt like something physical pressing on me. Then pain, low and persistent, on my right side. I went to my OB, who sent me to a specialist, who sent me for an MRI. The results came back on a Tuesday afternoon while I was meeting with a client. I stepped outside to take the call and sat down on the curb because my legs stopped working the way they're supposed to. Ovarian cyst. Large. Complex. The kind that doesn't go away on its own. My doctor, Dr. Hop Alvarez, kind, no nonsense, the kind of person you want delivering bad news, told me we needed to schedule surgery. Laparoscopic, she said, minimally invasive. Recovery would be 3 to 5 days in the hospital, then 2 weeks at home, limited activity. She was calm about it. I tried to be calm about it. I told Brennan that night. He was watching something on his laptop, earbuds in. I stood in the doorway of the living room and waited for him to notice me. When he finally looked up, I told him. He took one earbud out. He said, "Okay, when?" I said, "They're thinking next month." He nodded, put the earbud back in. I stood there for another moment, then went and sat on our bed and stared at the wall. I told myself he was just processing. I told myself he'd be different once it felt more real. I told myself a lot of things. Surgery was scheduled for a Thursday in March. My mom offered to fly in from Phoenix, but I told her it wasn't necessary. It was minimally invasive. I'd be fine. Brennan would be there. My brother Theo offered to take time off work. I told him the same thing. Brennan would be there. The night before surgery, Brennan told me he had a work trip that week, a client thing, in Boston. He'd already booked the flights. I looked at him and said, "You booked flights for the week of my surgery." He said, "The client called 3 weeks ago. I had to lock it in." I said, "Brennan, I'm having surgery on Thursday." He said, "I know. I'll be back by Sunday. You'll be discharged by then." I didn't sleep that night, not because I was scared of the surgery, though I was, a little, but because of the particular loneliness of realizing that the person you married has done the math on your hospital stay and decided the number worked out in his favor. My best friend, Olivia, drove me to the hospital Thursday morning. She sat with me through pre-op, held my hand when they put in the IV, made the nurses laugh. She's the kind of person who makes hard things feel survivable. When they wheeled me back, she squeezed my fingers and said, "I'll be here when you wake up." She was. She was there the whole first day. Brennan texted me Thursday evening. "How'd it go?" "Thinking of you." I read it 3 times. Then I put my phone face down on the bedside table. He didn't call. Not Thursday. Not Friday. On Saturday, he sent a photo of himself at a rooftop bar in Boston with the caption, "Work dinners. Pray for me." I saw it and felt something in me go very quiet and very cold at the same time. My mom called every day. Theo called every day. Olivia came both days. She wasn't working. Dr. Alvarez came by each morning to check my incisions and told me I was healing well, faster than expected. On Sunday, Brennan texted, "Headed to the airport. Home tonight. How are you feeling?" I said, "Ready to come home." He said, "Great. I have dinner with the Hargrove account tonight, probably 8ish. But I'll see you when I'm back." I read that message 4 times. I was discharged Sunday afternoon. Olivia came to get me because I hadn't asked Brennan. I hadn't even considered it by that point. She drove me home, helped me inside, got me settled on the couch with a blanket and the remote and a container of soup she'd made herself. She asked if I wanted her to stay. I told her I was fine. She left around 6. Brennan came home at 11:15. I was still on the couch. I'd fallen asleep twice and woken up twice and just stayed there. He came through the door smelling like wine in a restaurant, that particular combination of garlic and candle smoke that clings to you after a long dinner. He saw me on the couch and said, "Hey, you're up." I said, "I've been home since 4. He said, Right. How are you feeling?" I said, 4 days, Brennan." He sat down in the chair across from me. He had his jacket over his arm. He looked tired in the way people look tired after a long, pleasant evening, not the kind of tired that comes from worry. He said, "I know you're upset." I said I had surgery and you went to Boston. He said it was a work commitment. I explained that. I said, "You booked the flights after you knew about the surgery." He paused. And in that pause, I learned something, because he didn't deny it. He just looked at me for a moment and then said, "I couldn't move the client." I said, "You didn't try." He didn't answer. He said he was tired and was going to bed. He asked if I needed anything before he went. I said no. He went down the hall and I heard the bathroom tap run and then the bedroom door close. And I sat there in the dark living room thinking about the vineyard in October and my mom crying and how 25-year-old me had felt like she'd done something right. I slept on the couch. The next few days were quiet in the wrong way. Brennan went to work. He brought home food twice, once Thai, once a pizza, and set it on the counter and said, "Picked up dinner," like he was completing a checklist. He asked me how I was feeling in the same tone he'd used to ask if I'd seen his keys. I answered. We were polite to each other the way strangers are polite. On Thursday, 1 week after surgery, I was feeling well enough to sit at my desk for a few hours. I was going through invoices when I found something. I should explain, Brennan and I have a joint account for shared expenses. His salary goes into his personal account. A portion transfers automatically to the joint account each month. I manage the bills, the transfers, the records. I've always managed them. Brennan is good at many things, but not administration. And somewhere along the way it became mine. I was reconciling a transfer and I noticed a charge I didn't recognize. A subscription service, a name I didn't know, $240 a month. I went back through the statements. It had been there for 14 months. In 14 months, I had never noticed because I'd never looked that carefully. I searched the company name. Nothing obvious. I searched it with Brennan's name. Nothing. I called the number listed on their website. The automated system asked me to enter the account number or the email address on file. I tried our joint email. No match. I tried Brennan's personal email. No match. I sat very still for a moment. Then I went to the filing cabinet where we keep documents, lease, insurance, tax records, and I started looking through things I had never looked through carefully before. Because I trusted him, because we were married, because I thought trust was something you gave without keeping a receipt. It took me an hour. At the end of that hour, I had found 3 things. First, a credit card in my name that I did not open. The statements were going to a P.O. box I'd never heard of. The balance was $11,000. Second, a lease agreement dated 8 months ago for an apartment across town, in his name, active. Third, a life insurance policy, mine, with the beneficiary updated 14 months ago. I had signed the original policy when we got married. I had not signed the update. My signature on that document was not my signature. I closed the cabinet. I went and sat on the couch, the same couch where I'd spent 4 days recovering while my husband was in Boston, and I called my brother. Theo picked up on the second ring. He heard my voice and said, "What happened?" Not a question. He knows me well enough that he could tell. I told him everything. The surgery, the Boston trip, the credit card, the lease, the insurance policy, the signature that wasn't mine. I told him in the order it had happened, slowly, the way you do when you're still trying to believe it yourself. Theo didn't interrupt. He asked 2 questions, the name on the credit card and whether I was physically safe. I said yes. He said, "Don't touch anything else. Don't move anything. I'm calling someone." Theo is an attorney. Family law mostly, but he knows everyone. Within 2 hours, he had called a financial crimes attorney named Sandra Walsh, who had called a forensic accountant, who had begun the process of tracing exactly what had been done with the credit card. Sandra called me directly that evening. She was precise and calm. She told me that what I was describing, the fraudulent credit card, the forged signature on an insurance document, were both potentially criminal. She said we needed to move carefully and quickly. She asked me a series of questions and I answered all of them. By the next morning, I had done the following things. With Sandra's guidance, I had contacted my bank to freeze the joint account and flag the fraudulent card. I had called my insurance company, reported the unauthorized beneficiary change, and begun the process of having it investigated. I had photographed every document in that filing cabinet, and I had sent Olivia a message asking her to come over Friday evening because I didn't want to be alone. Brennan didn't know any of this. He came home from work Thursday evening and asked what we wanted to do for dinner. I said I wasn't hungry. He ordered himself something and ate at the kitchen counter on his phone. I watched him from the doorway and felt something I hadn't expected. Not rage, not grief, but a kind of clarity, like the feeling after a long fever breaks. Theo arrived Friday morning. He didn't call first. He just texted me when he was 20 minutes out and I unlocked the lobby door for him. When he came in and saw me, he hugged me for a long time without saying anything. He's 4 years older than me. He was at every one of my school plays, every graduation, every hard thing. Some people have that, someone who just shows up. I have Theo. He sat at my kitchen table with a notepad and his phone and 2 coffee cups, and we went through everything again. He had already spoken with Sandra 3 times. He'd also contacted our building's management company because the apartment is mine, the mortgage is mine, and under the circumstances, we needed to understand exactly what Brennan's rights were and weren't. The answer, it turned out, was less than he thought. The apartment was mine before the marriage. It remained in my name only. The joint account was being frozen. The car we shared was also registered in my name. I bought it 2 years before we met. Brennan's name was nowhere on the title. That afternoon, Sandra arrived at my apartment with a colleague. We sat at the kitchen table and she walked me through what came next. She explained the process. The police report for the forged signature and the fraudulent credit card would need to be filed. The insurance company had already flagged the account for investigation. The forensic accountant had found in preliminary review that money from the joint account, money I had deposited, had been transferred to accounts that fed back to the apartment across town. There was a name on those accounts I didn't recognize. A woman's name. I had suspected it. Knowing it didn't make it easier. But it didn't break me the way I thought it would either. Brennan came home at 6:30 to find Theo sitting at the kitchen table. Sandra on one side of him, her colleague on the other, and a police report already filed with the precinct 2 blocks over. He stopped in the doorway. He looked at all of them. Then he looked at me. I said, "I'd like you to leave." He said, "What is this?" I said, "Sandra is going to explain a few things to you. Then I'd like you to leave." He tried, for a moment, to be the person he'd always been, confident, slightly contemptuous of things that inconvenienced him. He said something about this being dramatic. He said something about talking. Sandra said, in the most level voice I've ever heard, that he was being investigated for 2 counts of financial fraud and 1 count of forgery, and that anything he said in this room could be noted. He stopped talking. He left with a bag. The doorman downstairs held the lobby door for him and then looked up at me. I was standing at the window and gave a small neutral nod. I nodded back. That night, Theo stayed. Olivia came over and brought groceries and made pasta. The three of us sat at the kitchen table and ate and talked about nothing important for a while. A TV show, a story Olivia had from work, something Theo's daughter had said last week. It was the most normal I'd felt in months. At some point, Theo looked at me and said, "You okay?" I thought about it honestly. I said, "I will be." He said, "Yeah, you will." The legal process took several months. The forged signature on the insurance document was confirmed by a handwriting expert. The fraudulent credit card had been used for rent payments, restaurant bills, jewelry, all connected to the other apartment, the other life Brennan had been maintaining while I paid our mortgage and managed our joint account and recovered from surgery on my own couch. He was charged. The case didn't go to trial. He pleaded, took a deal. Restitution was ordered. He lost his position at his firm. I filed for divorce the same week Sandra filed the fraud report. It was finalized faster than I expected, which Sandra said sometimes happens when there is clear financial misconduct and no shared property or children. The apartment is still mine. The car is still mine. The joint account was closed. What remained in it was returned to me. I went back to work 6 weeks after surgery. Slowly at first, then full-time. My first client back was a young couple renovating a brownstone in Brooklyn. They were excited about everything, kept changing their minds about the kitchen tile, argued gently about paint colors in a way that was clearly more about excitement than disagreement. I liked working with them. I liked being useful in a way that had nothing to do with any of this. My mom flew in for a weekend in June. We walked around the neighborhood, went to a farmer's market, made dinner together in the apartment. At some point she said, "I wish you'd told me sooner." I said, "I know." She said, "You always think you can handle everything alone." I said, "I know." She held my hand across the kitchen table and didn't say anything else. Theo still calls every Sunday. He did that before all of this and he does it now. I look forward to it the same way I always have. Some nights I still lie awake and think about the timing of things, how I almost didn't look at those statements, how I'd gone 14 months paying bills and reconciling accounts and never looked closely enough at that one charge, how differently things might have gone if I'd kept trusting without checking. But I've also thought about this. I made the call when I didn't know what else to do, when I was sitting on that couch in the dark with a heating pad and a discharge folder and the specific exhaustion of someone who has just understood something they didn't want to understand. I called my brother, and he answered. And that was enough to start. The morning after Brendan left, I woke up early. The apartment was quiet. I made coffee and stood at the kitchen window and watched the street come alive the way it does. Delivery trucks. A woman walking a dog that had opinions about every tree. A man in a blue coat who stopped to look at his phone and then laughed at whatever he saw. I thought, this apartment was mine before him. It's mine now. Everything I built before he arrived is still here. I thought, I am 29 years old and I know exactly what my signature looks like. I drank my coffee. I opened my laptop. I had 3 client emails and a proposal due by end of week, and a kitchen renovation in Prospect Heights I was genuinely excited about. I started with the emails. I've thought a lot about the word trust since all of this ended. Not in a bitter way. More like the way you think about a tool you used wrong for a long time. A hammer you kept using as a screwdriver because no one told you it wouldn't work. Or maybe because you just didn't want to look closely enough to notice. I trusted Brennan with things I never verified. The joint account, the filing cabinet, the assumption that the person sleeping in the same bed as you is building something with you, not against you. I told myself that checking was a form of distrust, and that distrust was a kind of failure. I had it completely backwards. Real trust isn't blind. It's not the absence of attention. Real trust is what you have left after you've paid attention, and the thing still holds. What I had with Brennan wasn't trust. It was avoidance dressed up to look like faith. There's a difference, and I learned it the hard way, and a filing cabinet on a Thursday afternoon with a healing incision, and 14 months of bank statements I'd never read carefully enough. What I keep coming back to is this. The consequences of his choices were already in motion long before I found those documents. The fraudulent card, the forged signature, the apartment across town. None of that happened the week before I found it. It had been building for over a year, and in some way, so had the moment I called Theo. The fact that I'd always been careful with my finances, always kept the apartment in my name, always maintained my own professional life. Those weren't lucky accidents. They were small, quiet choices that, when everything else fell apart, gave me somewhere to stand. I think about Theo driving to my apartment without waiting to be asked twice. I think about Olivia making pasta at my kitchen table the night Brennan left with a bag. I think about Sandra Walsh laying out the facts in the clearest, calmest voice I'd ever heard. None of those people appeared by accident. I had built those relationships the way you build anything real. Slowly, with consistency. Showing up when it wasn't convenient. Being someone worth calling at 2 p.m. when everything you thought was solid turns out not to be. Brennan made choices, and he lived inside their consequences. So did I, and so did the version of me who never looked at those statements. The difference is that I got to choose what I did next. I filed the report. I called my brother. I went back to work. I kept going. There's no version of this story where I didn't get hurt. That part was already decided. But the part where I got back up, that was mine. That's always ours, I think. The getting back up part, no matter what someone else has done or taken or forged with your name, the next choice belongs to you. I'm 30 now. The apartment is quiet most mornings in the good way. I drink my coffee at the kitchen window and watch the street, and think about the kitchen renovation in Prospect Heights, about the client who keeps changing her mind about tile and how endearing it is, actually, to care that much about something small. I think about what I want the next few years to look like. I think about it clearly, with both eyes open. That's the only way I know how to do it now.